Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 992B, and today's date is June 8th, 2016, and the title of the episode is DHS has been training and preparing for a major event. Let's get into the economic collapse, political and geopolitical news. Now, every day we hear another story about Obamacare, and every day it is getting worse and worse. The people are definitely paying the price here, and we hear nothing from the government. We hear nothing from Congress. We hear absolutely nothing. It's like crickets. And we know 13 exchanges have already defaulted and closed. And we see at this point that there are more than 92,000 people in Colorado that are going to be losing their Obamacare healthcare coverage in 2017. Because we know that 4 of the large health insurers, United Healthcare, Humana, Rocky Mountain Health, and Anthem Blue, guess what? They're out. And they will not be offering individual plans or reducing offers in 2017, leaving individuals scrambling to find another plan. This entire healthcare system they set up was a disaster from the beginning. It is still a disaster, and it is getting worse. And at this point, I think the people of the United States should stand up and say, okay, we've had enough of this. It's time to get rid of this. Let's get rid of the penalties and the taxes. Let's get rid of all of this because it is not working. Actually, Congress should be sitting there going, this doesn't work. It's time to remove it. We need to go back or do something completely different. But of course, we're not hearing much. And I'm not talking about, oh, you know what, I have a better plan and let's go with this plan, which is pretty much the same thing but wrapped up in a different package. And as we know, as Obamacare started, this was never a benefit to the people. And we continually get proof of this every single day. Now, there were some leaked documents about the British police teaching Saudi officers high-tech crime detection techniques that might lead to torture and execution. And this is coming from activists, human rights charities. They're saying that internal police documents released under the Freedom of Information laws show Saudi personnel have been trained in detective work and high-tech forensics at England and Wales College of Policing. The report shows college bosses recognize there was a risk. The skills being trained are used to identify individuals who later go on to be tortured or subjected to other human rights abuses. And we start to realize that many of the private West Central Bank countries, they're involved in this type of activity where they have these countries, or they have a country where they have regime change, and they use torture as a device to keep the people in line. And we know that the United States has many different areas around the world where they have secret areas where they hold people. Of course, they're guilty until proven innocent. They torture them, and it's not just outside of the U.S., and we know it happened in Chicago. And there's probably other areas inside the United States that we just haven't found out about yet. Now, something very interesting about the sanctions with Russia. The American government is pushing for more sanctions against Russia. And what is happening here is the U.S. wants to extend the sanctions and add a couple of more. And then we have Assistant Secretary, Bureau of European and Eurasian Affairs, Victoria Nuland. She is at the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and trying to convince countries that we need these sanctions. We need to band together. We need to add some more. And very interestingly, in France, the French Senate has voted in favor of a resolution designed to lift EU-imposed sanctions which they placed on Russia back in 2014. And the proposal calls for a gradual relief. And there was a huge majority of senators, 302, voted for the move, and 16 were against it. Now, the U.S. is going to dispatch an envoy, which I believe they already did, to keep the EU in line and keep them together on Russian sanctions. So when we look at this situation right now, France might be a target for another terror attack. Because right now, they want to lift the sanctions on Russia. We know that the U.S. cannot have this. They cannot have the rest of the EU countries say, okay, let's join in with France and remove the sanctions on Russia. This would destroy their plan. So we've been hearing all this information about terrorism, how not to travel in Europe, and we're starting to get a clear picture of what is going on here. Because of what is happening in the EU, because of France saying, listen, we don't want these sanctions, it is hurting our economy, France at this point might be a prime target for the next terror attack. And we're going to have to watch this situation very, very closely. Now, a U.S. State Department official, which this person does not want to be named, they are out there saying that North Korea has restarted production of plutonium fuel. They've went in and they restarted their production of nuclear bombs. And the proof they have is, we suspect this. That's the proof. They have no other proof whatsoever. They just think this is what North Korea is doing. Now, this is all part of the propaganda because they want everyone to believe that North Korea is going to be the loose cannon. Now, they're trying to push North Korea into becoming the loose cannon where they can say, look what they just did. We need to go to war. Now, it doesn't mean this is the only country they're trying this with because all the players are the same. We see that the U.S. is deliberately provoking China. Now, we had another incident. A U.S. Air Force RC-135 reconnaissance plane was again intercepted by two Chinese J-10 fighter planes during a routine patrol in international airspace very close to the border of China. Now, the U.S. is out there saying that the intercept was done in an unsafe manner, and China is saying absolutely not. This is not true whatsoever. The U.S. is using this to hype up the situation, which I kind of agree because we've seen this before where the U.S. takes their spy planes or their ships and they bring them into an area where they know the country is going to send up their jets and send them over to see what's going on. Just like if China was flying a spy plane right on the East Coast where New York is, where Virginia is, where Washington, D.C. is, what would happen? The U.S. would send up fighter jets instantaneously. They would intercept. What is going on here? Well, the U.S. is doing this to each and every one of these countries to try to provoke them into doing something and trying to build their story over time to convince the people that these countries are going to be the enemies of the United States because they need this when we go to war. Now, the UK media had a very interesting story all over the place where they hailed the Royal Navy and NATO about tracking and intercepting a Russian submarine off the coast of the UK. And the news created a lot of stir in the UK. And they had headlines like, Vladimir Putin sends attack submarine into English Channel. The Daily Mail had, Putin sends submarine into English Channel days before England versus Russia at Euro 2016. And they continually went on with this. But what's very interesting about this is that the submarine was above water, first of all. and it was being tugged around by a vessel. And Russia is very surprised about this because they're saying, okay, first of all, the sub wasn't underwater. It's being towed around. And it took the Royal Navy and NATO allies to find this sub. It seems a little ridiculous, but this was used as a propaganda stunt to make it seem like there are continuous Russian subs coming into this area. And most of these type of stories turn out to be pure propaganda, and the private Western Central Bank countries love to use this. Now the question is, why are they doing this? Well, they need to prepare the people. They need for the people to understand that Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, Syria, many of the BRIC nations, these are the enemies that we'll be going to war with. Now, the United States looks to increase the pace of joint exercises with the Georgian military. And we can see right now they're going to be bringing in military assets and military troops into this area. But they say, don't worry, they're not going to be permanent. Well, we know when they say they're not going to be permanent, what they're going to do is they're going to bring in temporary troops, and there'll be no expiration date, or they will bring in troops and rotate them in this area. So when you look at this, they're permanent. But they use this type of doublespeak to make everyone believe that, no, we're not putting permanent troops here. We're just rotating troops around, or these are temporary, but we have no expiration date ever. Now, out in Turkey, we see the lawmakers in Turkey. They are now subject to prosecution after a bill allowing criminal charges to be brought against legislators was signed by President Erdogan. They no longer have immunity. And we see that Erdogan is going to be going after these people. Now, of course, this new law is a violation of free speech. And he's going after certain parties like the Kurds, like the Kurdistan Workers' Party, because he believes that these are terrorist organizations. Now, of course, leaders that take different parties and say these are terrorists, these are the parties that they are most afraid of. They are threatened by them, and they need to get rid of them. And sometimes it's a little difficult just to come out and wipe them out, so they use other methods where they can get them, imprison them, and keep them away from removing their authority. And this is exactly what's happening in Turkey. Now we see the USS Dwight Eisenhower and their strike group. That ship has now entered the Mediterranean. And we see that they're going to be joining the USS Harry S. Truman in this area. And we can see that along with the aircraft carrier, there's a guided missile cruiser, there's destroyers, and they're saying that all this is to go after the Islamic State. Now, what's amazing is that the Islamic State is continually being reduced in size by Russia. And we know that the United States government central bankers, along with Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, they have been airlifting the Islamic State out of the region, bringing them over to Libya, bringing them over to Lebanon. But at this point, we see that they have brought another aircraft carrier into this area, and they're trying to use it as they're going after the Islamic State. Now, the Islamic State has been losing a huge amount of territory. Why at this point would they bring in another ship like this? If the Islamic State is losing territory, their forces have been cut in half. We see at this time that they're preparing for something completely different. They're preparing for some type of offensive to back the moderate rebels, to back Al-Qaeda, to back al-Nusra. This is why everything that we've been looking at, the missiles set up on the border of Turkey, the U.S. coming in and helping Turkey put up surveillance on the border, the building of bases, the military assets that have been flowing in. And we see right now is that the U.S. and Turkey, they need to defend the corridor, the Azaz corridor leading to Aleppo. And if they can't hold that, and the Syrian armed forces and Russia capture this area, the flow of military assets, the flow of terrorist groups coming into Syria is going to stop. And this is going to put the United States into a corner. And this is going to be a major, major problem. And we see already there's a huge buildup of terrorist organizations in Aleppo. And they're continually bringing in more and more military assets, because what we're seeing right now, this is the preparation for what is about to come. And we see right now that everything is starting to build. Israel is flying into Syria right now, and they hit a military base in Homs because they're doing whatever they possibly can to set everything up for what is coming. Because you have to remember, the coalition forces, they've been preparing, getting ready for what is coming most likely in August. So all indicators right now are still on track. Nothing has changed up to this point. We see that Syria, Russia, and Iran, they're having a meeting tomorrow about the situation in Syria. So they're looking at the situation. They're seeing military assets being moved in. They're seeing new ships arrive. We know that NATO, Germany, the other coalition forces all have ships around this area. Of course, they're using the excuse that they're helping the refugees, but they're there on purpose so they can use them later on. They're very close to the situation of Libya, of Syria, of the entire area, and they can have these ships in where they need them in a matter of moments. And we can see right now that all of this is being prepared. Now, to get this off the ground, most likely they're going to need some type of an event. We see that there are reports coming out, and this is mostly propaganda, to scare everyone, to let everyone know that this is coming, where the Islamic State has kill lists of thousands of Americans. We're also getting a report, which I find very interesting, is that a large number of Islamic State militants have already been trained for suicide attacks with chemical bombs. And they're saying that the Islamic State has already equipped these people, they already have the chemical bombs, and they fear they're going to be using them in Iraq and Syria. Or maybe some other country, we don't know for sure. Now, if they do this, this could be an event where the U.S. says, okay, enough's enough, they're using chemical weapons, and they could use this as an event to say, we're going into Syria, we're going into Iraq full-fledged to stop this. Because now they're killing people using these dangerous chemical weapons. Now, of course, as we know, this was a complete setup by the U.S. government central bankers and the coalition forces to convince everyone this is what they're going to do. We also have to remember that France most likely is ripe for a terrorist attack. So we might see events occur in many different places at once. Because what we're seeing right now is DHS, they are preparing very hard right now for something that is coming. Now, what is that? Well, a recent report which was released says that the Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management Command Center has been monitoring metro and area roads. Now, they're saying this could be for a natural disaster or a terrorist attack if something should happen in a city. They're setting up evacuation routes, and they're saying we are working on a plan where we can get people out of the city very, very quickly and control the traffic. This is very interesting. And during this time period, they will control all security cameras in different areas of the cities. And of course, what they want is they want to make sure that this false flag isn't reported as a false flag, and if they spot something, they can go after that person and cover up what is happening. Because as we know, when this event occurs, it's going to be a false flag. It's something that they've been preparing for. We have to remember just a couple of months ago, New York City, they were training in the subways. And what were they doing there? They were using gas, like a chemical weapon, in the subway of New York. We got the report that the Islamic State is getting ready. They already have cells with chemical weapons. They could be using them in Syria, Iraq, or any other country. And when we start to put all these pieces together, we're starting to realize that this next event is coming. And we need to continually watch. We need to continually prepare. We need to continually get ready for what is coming. Because as we can see, as the economy continues to deteriorate and collapse, the central bankers, they need to control this whole entire situation. And they don't want to be blamed. They want to say, okay, all eyes off of what's happening here. We need to go after this terrorist group. We need to go to war. We need to bring the troops in. We need to have a draft. Because what's going to happen is that Russia, China, they're going to be on the other side. This has all been planned out. Now, can plans change? Are they perfect? No, they're not perfect. They always mess up. But they always keep their goals. They always keep trying. And we need to speak up. We need to band together as a people. We need to stop this next war. And this is why we're tracking this. This is why we're looking at it. This is why we're getting the word out. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.